shine. That's fantastic.
So you can't see it, but over there, the sun is just rising up over the horizon here. It's awesome.
Beautiful.
It's
Beautiful.
beautiful.
All right. I don't know about you, but I had an interesting week. It's been kind of a one of those challenge your emotions weeks, and I think we're seeing that all across the board.
So, so it feels like the timing is fantastic. When we talk about, we had talked about being on the edge of something new.
Yeah.
And a few weeks ago, when we talked about that and kind of sequenced it out, I'm not sure we could foresee how the world would be feeling about now, how we as individuals perhaps are feeling about now. Is like we really truly are on the edge of something that is entirely new, not just necessarily for us as individuals, but as a society, as a world, perhaps.
I think so. I think what we're seeing is the realization, and people have said it for the last few weeks, but I think it's starting to hit home that nothing's going to be quite the same after this. Everything in the world will have shifted somewhat, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
I
we talked multiple times about, let's just wait for things to get back to normal, or when this thing is over,
Yeah,
when this
whatever.
thing is over.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of folks, including all of us, talking about there is no return to normal.
No.
And so I'm excited about this topic because, in that transition of organizational change or dealing with change, there's that moment when you start envisioning possibilities, when you start thinking, okay, it ain't going to go back to normal. I can't deny this anymore. Something has happened. We're into something new. So what does that look like? And that's what I want to talk about today. I think it's a fantastic topic.
I think it's a great topic because it's filled with possibility and potential.
Yeah.
It
And
was a phrase I heard from a colleague a few weeks ago, and I really love it. And I think it's so true. And it's just called the art of the possible.
Yeah, I like that.
And I just
like
think
that too.
it's
I
just
like
such a
that too.
good phrase.
So-
I think last week we talked a little bit about what is that that acknowledgement of there is some loss here. I mean, our comfort zones have been kind of shaken up a little, and acknowledging that. And what I'm hearing out there, what I'm hearing out in the world when I'm paying attention to how people are feeling and what they're going through, is I'm hearing that, okay, I kind of got this figured out, sort of. Now I know my new normal for the interim, but what do I have to do now? Like, now what? And one of the points that we talked about earlier was bad times can create great unfreezings. And that's organizationally, that's personally, that's globally, and wow, we've got this massive thing happening, this big, massive global experiment going on.
So
What
I
are we
like
going to unfreeze?
I like the phrase unfreeze. And the reason I like that is because it implies that something that otherwise would have been in motion has been suspended arbitrarily.
Yeah.
And it's now animated again, reanimated. And I think that I think we talked about keeping the learning on, and part of this isn't here, let's give you 6 places where you can go do distance learning and keep being professional. I think that's an important piece, but I think more of it is we as professionals, we as individuals, we as people that want to thrive and be successful and do something meaningful in the world, we have to unthaw ourselves so that we can continue to grow and to develop. And I think this is one of those moments of inflection where we do exactly that.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I
But
know
it's not.
Simone and I were talking earlier this week that changing ourselves and through this is a little uncomfortable and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny when I think about what is the edge. Oh, thank you. That was so good of you, Roy, just to do that. One of my favorite movies, Mission to Mars. And I really like this particular part of the script because it you know, the universe is not really chaos. There is, you know, we might feel it as chaos, but, you know, we can understand the actions and interactions, and it is about connecting all the time. And when they said, Leo, life reaches out for life, I think that's exactly what's happening now as well with people on virtual. Look at the explosion of meetups and having the, you know, the Brady Bunches and galleries going. So I think that's exactly what happens too, is that everybody is reaching out to everybody. And, you know, when we think about what is our purpose, what have we been born for, isn't it to actually connect and to make something, create something from that connection? So for me, to stand on a new world and look beyond it to the next one, that's a pretty good mission to have, and not so much as an end goal. Yes, we want to have objectives and we want to have an end goal, but for me, it's always been about that journey, getting there. That is the goal for me, is to enjoy the journey along the way. You're not going to enjoy all parts of it, but to be a part of that, to be present in the moment of that journey as we move through to whatever our destination that we have, that we're looking to get to.
Yeah. I love the connection piece, because that's what we're seeing. I mean, we've seen people connecting in ways that they've never connected before, right? We're seeing that, and we're seeing it especially in the stories that are about people going above and beyond to help their fellow people, or the frontline workers, or those examples that we keep seeing out in the on the internet, where people are just, you know, gathering in ways they've never gathered before, even though they're not allowed to be together.
Case in point.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd really like to, you know, when we clarify what do we mean by standing on the edge, I think it's not just standing on the edge. That it was very critical of us to clarify that the edge of something new. So we're not talking about necessarily, you know, we are standing on the edge sometimes.
I'm a donkey on the edge.
Right on the edge. And you know what? It is sometimes disturbing, but it's also momentous as well. And you know, for people, the things that are happening in their own lives. So yeah, they will be feeling unsettled, very uncertain, and that sort of thing. So very good quote. Yes, we're scared to death to try new things because we think we have to get it right.
The first time.
You know what's fascinating is all of us are tangentially associated with the IT industry of some sort, service management, IT technology, whatnot. And we've talked about for years the idea of agile, minimum viable, iterative development. And yet, when we're faced with this in our own lives, we are scared to death because we're afraid we're going to make a mistake. And so I'm not sure that we've actually internalized what it means. And I think that growing, adaptive, resilient people are those that are willing to try, mistake. I mean, there's scads of stories I don't even have to reference of, you know, somebody who just kept trying, or I just identified yet another way that it's not going to work. I'm excited for that moving forward. But I think that this is perhaps this generation's first opportunity to come face to face with. Now we have to. We have to change. We have to adapt our course forward, and it's uncomfortable. It's scary.
And we have lots of excuses. You know, I think of Brene Brown with her daring greatly. You know, I read her book and I thought, yeah, but you're this, you've got this. Of course you could dare greatly. Look at you, you know. And we have a tendency to do that. We find excuses as to why we find it difficult to dare greatly. And I think standing on the edge of something new is the open door to daring greatly. I think. And even for all of us, you know, we've been talking for a long time, and here we are. This is the first time we've been willing to actually make that public.
Yeah.
Here we are, daring greatly.
We're daring greatly.
I think part of it too is
it's my new stage name, Daring Greatly.
Daring Greatly.
And I'll be in the phone book. I'll be greatly, daring. So it works both ways. I'm just saying.
Oh dear. No, but it's also that opportunity to find the courage, you know, how you go about what it is that gives you courage, who does that come from? Is it from within you? If you're standing on the edge, maybe you are actually being supported by someone else and holding someone else.
Yeah. Ah!
Yeah, that's kind of me when I see Greg. When he first comes on,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And KTLO Learn is live streaming now on YouTube.
Exactly.
Indeed, we are.
There's an old saying that, you ever woke up from a nightmare screaming and realized that you weren't sleeping? I thought about that this week. It's like, there's a lot of change in the air, and there's a lot of emotions associated with that, a lot of uncertainty.
So with the uncertainty, for me, what I keep thinking about are how many of us have been trained on the old adage that you have to know the end point, and then you set your goals, and then you define those goals through to the end point. And, there's so many people who are sitting here going, but I can't see the end point.
Yeah.
And what's exciting about that is the possibilities, because without a predefined endpoint, we have something really cool going on. And in every industry, the positive things that could happen. Yeah. We're in the greatest experiment globally that we have ever seen. And it's so many experiments. You want to talk about agile? How about all the server farms that have had to figure out their load to be able to manage all of us who are now suddenly online? Or even, for the first time, I finally read an article that wasn't buried 87 articles deep about we really ought to check on those GPS and atomic clock systems and backups.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
I really see potential for change in so many ways. Exciting story about quantum computing and a reach out to people to ask, will you share your CPU so that we could do some quantum computing to solve the COVID problem? All the things in the world, the virtual world has shifted by 10 years in things that we've been talking about. We've got to get organizations going that way, and education, the change in education and the value of IT. We're questioning everything now, like meetings and travel and facilitation. How do I do a keynote? And enterprise cloud technologies and what exactly do they mean and why do they mean that? But the conversation is leaving IT and going into the organization, and that's exciting.
That's really interesting.
There's the edge of something new.
Yeah, that is
really new.
So some of the conversations I've been in, it has a little bit of a kind of maybe a negative bent to it. It's like, see, we've been telling you for all these years, DR, business continuity, our capacity. I just saw an article this morning that state organizations, and mine is no different, state government organizations are desperately looking for COBOL programmers because our payroll systems, our unemployment systems are still, and to a large degree,
kept that training up.
Yes. To a large degree, I've said, with regard to governance of IT, I've said, look, you have exactly the IT that you've chosen to have.
Exactly.
And that seems to be a kind of an adversarial relationship. And the fact of the matter is, IT as a technology is a part of the business. There isn't us and them. We're part of the business. And how much technology you need, how much skill set, how much capacity you need is a business decision. And that decision is going to be challenged now going forward. It is being challenged right this very moment. It is being
challenged. And I think part of that, one of the articles I was reading only this morning, and it comes back to, our emotional awareness and empathy and everything else. But it's like, when we're in physical or emotional pain, or even just that stress of not being able to think rationally right at that moment because there's just so much information that's overwhelming us in what we have to do. Our awareness really contracts, and it can make it really hard or seemingly impossible to actually see beyond our own little moment of what's happening. And so I think that's also an edge of something new. We're learning how to actually take that next step. How do we step into the other part of the edge?
That's part of the complexity theory, right?
Yeah.
We know with complexity that if the solution is out here, these people can only see one step or two steps further, right? That's part of that whole complexity model. And we've gone from complicated. We knew in our heads what it was supposed to look like, but there was a lot of moving parts.
Yep.
But now we have no idea. There's no predefined ending now. I mean, the potential is so endless.
We get to write the ending.
We get to write it, but it's still complex, right?
Yeah.
It has now increased and gone from complicated to now complex, because without an ending, the possibilities are endless. So that increases what we have to zero in on, right?
That comes back to my point about the journey, because I think we have to really be looking at what is that next step we take, but not just on a physical level, in terms of that purpose of, discovering. It's a rediscovery. And I think that's where it's really exciting as well. We are standing on the edge of something new. And for many people, that edge is something within themselves as well.
Yeah.
So I was once challenged for, why don't you take the next step once? And I said, my answer was, I don't know. And the brilliant person with whom I was speaking said, I think you do. And that conversation has haunted me for weeks now, because the fact of the matter is, when I sit there in the dark and watch the sun come up, as I'm prone to do, is I say to myself, I think I do know, but I can't quite put my finger on it yet. I can't get a hold of it. I look in my hand and I say, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to keep going for it. That's exciting to me. It's like in a time of chaos, or complexity versus complicated, I think those elements are important, because the point I was trying to make when I talked about Gneven a couple of episodes back was that if we apply simple or obvious thinking into something that's complex or borderline chaotic, we're making mistakes. And the one thing that has jumped out through this whole situation to me is that when you're in chaos, the correct sense-making tool is to do something so that you start learning what the new is. Yeah. And I think so many of us are saying, all right, we need more capacity. We need to change our policies. In other words, we're doing the same thing, only in a different context. And I think we're struggling with that. And so as a leader, as an individual, as somebody that sits with a cup of coffee and says, what does it all mean? I don't know, is I'm trying to experiment. I'm trying to just try something and be willing to do that.
I think a couple of episodes ago, and of course this all blurs together because we've all been having these conversations for a long time. Was this in one of these shows that we're doing, or was
I don't know.
Who knows? I think I talked about standing exactly at the North Pole. I'm going to be Greg here for a minute and hold up my mechanical pencil. There you go. Same thing. You stand exactly at the North Pole, and no matter which way you step, you're moving south, right? And you step backwards, you're moving south. You step left, you're moving south. You step right, you're moving south. And it's a little bit of a tough concept to grasp, but think about it. If you're at the North Pole, any way is south. And so we're at that spot where any way we move is some kind of progress, whether it's personal, professional, business-wise. We're kind of stuck. We're all in our isolated places, but we're all thinking of ways that we can act and trying to figure out how that works in this new world we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
I just went into my isolated space for a moment. Sorry if I blacked out there.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, when we take steps, it's really easy to throw our hands up in the air and say, I don't know. I don't know, right? It's easy to do that, because when you look at all the potential steps you could take, it gets overwhelming, right?
Yes.
But there are some things that we can do if we can quiet ourselves. Remember, we talked about, just hope lives in muting the noise, right? And the pieces, they aren't steps, they're thought processes. You look for, where are the scarcities? Where are the gaps? What's missing? What isn't here? instead of looking at what was and seeing it as a loss, the move forward includes what's missing. This is a big inflection point. It's a strategic inflection point. What's expensive? What doesn't need to be expensive? Where are the surpluses? How do I get my job done? And what's missing in that now? Because now I can see it from a different vantage point.
And I think one of the other things that's happening at the moment, because people have garnered this extra time because they're not commuting and this type of thing, one of the thoughts, seeing all the memes that are happening about schooling kids and at home and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, what are people actually doing with their extra time? And the question becomes, are they doing more work, or is it family, or is it for self? But the concern for me is there's a very, we're back to the edge of things again. There's a very slippery edge here of falling into deeper habits of the things that we don't want to be a habit in. Or we have this possibility of creating new habits. So I think this is, now so, some of those going into deeper habits, some of those habits can be good ones. My concern is spending too much time at work with this extra time, or, I think it should be on ourselves.
So that's a brilliant point. And one of the things I've alluded to is, well, let me back up. I think a lot of us, so in my day job, I'm doing it entirely from remote, and frankly, I could work 7/24 because it's urgent, it's important, and the people that I'm empowering are serving the citizens of my state. It's important. It's something that I'm passionate about. But what I've tried to do is be intentional. I go for a walk in the woods, and I'm slowing down, and I'm enjoying a cup of coffee, and I'm thinking. I'm just letting my mind go blank, because I think there is, in a fearful sort of way, we grab on to those things that we know. I've been busy before. I've added value before. I've fixed problems before. There's an adrenaline rush in it, and I've been doing IT operations for more than a couple of decades, and there's a sense of purpose in that, and I feel that. But if we grab onto what we have, and we don't allow ourselves to ponder the possibilities, then I think we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity, or we're postponing it because we're drowning out. What did you say, Patty? The mute the noise.
Yeah, mute the noise. Mute the noise.
And I feel like. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that for some of us, busyness is the noise. It's like, and we're doing it because it's like, well, I got to find, for those that whose jobs have dried up, or their gig work has dried up, or the consulting work has dried up, is like, I got to do something. I have to do something to get work. And that's true. I mean, that's
busyness is actually a form of avoidance. It is a form of distraction and avoidance. So that's the point, isn't it? Is that what are we doing with this extra time that we've gained if we're not commuting? I stressed for ages that the particular country train I have to take up, to get up to Paris was 5 hours without Wi-Fi, and it has very dodgy signal along the way, right? So I was like, and then they finally got Wi-Fi, and it was like an amazing thing. And what did I do when I finally got the Wi-Fi? I didn't really want to work anyway.
Right.
So because I'm on you want to. I wanted to enjoy, like, use that time to actually get into sync with what was going on, rather than, oh, okay, quiet, I can get this emails done now, and blah, blah, blah.
There's something that I kind of pride myself on, and that over the years, I've been able to exercise a little bit of self-discipline and not be engaged up to here. One of the things, of course, you guys know that I travel quite a bit in my work, not now, but usually. And a lot of times I'll be in an airport or an airplane or anywhere, and there's people typing and people, responding to, and people doing PowerPoints, and people just constantly can't wait to get in their seat on the plane so they can open up their laptop and get to work, gotta get to work. And I remember a friend of mine who was a New York State trooper, who was early in his career, was working road patrol when part of the Tappan Zee Bridge collapsed during a morning commute. And so there's this gaping hole in the roadway and nothing but, 75 feet of air underneath it into the Hudson River. And there's people driving around the hole. And he's like, what's wrong with you people? And they're got to get to work, got to get to work, got to get to work. And I hope, is my fervent hope, that people take the time to say, no, I don't have to be doing that right now. I would rather be in this airport watching the people around me, thinking about how they're reacting to each other, thinking about what I read yesterday, or maybe having my Kindle open and reading something new that's not related to what I'm doing specifically now. Take that time and just cordon it off. You can do this. You just have to be a little bit of discipline about it and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this because this is important. And I hope that this entire situation we find ourselves in kind of points up what is really important to us as humans and in our professional life, and says, okay, that was then, this is now.
There's a word that you use that I find I'm quite adverse to, which is discipline.
What's the word?
That's the word. Yeah, discipline. So, but I thought, can we change the word discipline to actually talk about changing routines or creating new habits? Because I think in creating a new routine, not even a habit, just creating a new routine for ourselves doesn't feel as difficult, or it doesn't feel as uncomfortable as trying to become disciplined. I got over that a long time ago.
In the transformation work that we do, when we're working with leaders and executives, it is always about you can't transform an organization until you're willing to transform yourself. It always starts with you. And the starting with you is we kind of talk about personal satisfaction. So where are you personally? What are you satisfied with? Because if all of your focus has been on your career and all of your focus has been on one or two other things, then you have an unbalanced life. There are 6 areas to the life that we talk about. It's relationships, giving, growth, habits, escapades, romance. There are areas that you need to take a really good look at and understand the satisfaction you have in those. And then you can be quiet enough to stop and say, how do I become satisfied? What does that mean for me? And that's where you start taking a look at how your behaviors line up with your values, right?
Definitely need more escapades.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that escapades starts with escape.
Exactly.
So how do you escape from an escapade? Never mind. This is the kind of thing I think about when I'm sitting in the airport.
It's called a bookshelf and an art room.
No, you all realize, of course, that Roy studied philosophy.
For very many years and way too long, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just a bit disappointed he's actually trimmed the beard off. We're just waiting for that, so he can swish the beard.
Not going to happen.
No, okay.
Not going to happen.
I'm starting to swish. Like I'm missing my hairdresser.
I'm swishing. Hang on. Do the swish.
I've been missing my hairdresser for far longer than you have. I'm just going to say.
So actually,
you missed that moment, Greg.
I love you guys. Most of you here, all of us actually, to one degree or another, have some kind of a creative artistic bent. And I read a book. It's a very vintage book by Brenda Uland. It's called If You Want to Write. It's very old, but it was highly recommended by somebody that I know that said that it's a good book to read. But one of the elements that came out from this, I mean, this is like, I don't know the copyright, I can probably bring it up, but we're talking 50s, right? Maybe even 40s. But one of the elements that she brought up was, if you want to be a creative, and whether it's writing a book or doing, physical art, painting, whatever, is you have to give your mind some space to be creative. And to a very practical sense, she said, the way you let your mind wander today creates the opportunity of being creative tomorrow and the next day and in the future. So if we're trapped with being busy, 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 we're actually depriving ourselves. This is how I've applied the thoughts here. If we're constantly busy out of fear or out of obligation or out of a sense of I want to do something that matters in this time, is I'm actually depriving myself of that creative energy that would allow me to envision possibilities. And so it's a trap. It's a hamster wheel where we go around and round and round. And I think that, Bill Gates is a classic example. Is he has these days, where he goes away. Steve Jobs, no meetings, and like there's a tremendous amount of space in these highly creative people to think, to ponder, to be bored, if you will, to let your mind wander, like Roy was talking about. It's like watching people, considering what it means, comparing that with signals that you've seen recently. And so I'm trying to create some space where this brain can envision possibilities. And in my journal, I've tried to draw pictures. They're horrible. I grab a guitar and I try to play some music, and it ain't all that good. And that's okay, because I'm trying to create a space where I can mute the noise and listen to possibilities.
And neurologically, that is so healthy for us. Like they say that if you want to have a really great meeting, take your team for a walk. Like, get out of the office, stop the busy.
Yeah.
You are,
I hate that.
Yeah.
If you
it
are,
may be
but
just
really,
because I'm the old guy and I walk
But-
slower than everybody else, and I wind up not being in a conversation because they're all ahead of me. But that's just me.
but really, neurologically, there are a couple of things going on right now for me that I'm seeing as incredibly positive, and one of them is the ability to plan for something really cool. Like, we have the potential to plan, and when you can say, I don't know what it's going to look like, but come out, when we come out of this, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to take this time to get there. The opportunity to be able to stop and breathe and pull your brain away. That's why all our good ideas happen in the shower, right? Like, it's the ability to pull ourselves away is what neurologically resets. And then when we add creativity onto that, it just explodes. The potential of the way we look at things explodes.
So how do we do that? Like, okay, I'm listening to this broadcast right now, and I like what you're talking about, but what do I do tomorrow? What do I do this afternoon? What do I do 10 minutes from now after I've heard you say all this brilliant stuff? What do I do?
For me, I'll probably just go and make a coffee to start with. Get out the ingredients out of the fridge to start preparing for dinner. But this is the interesting thing. I was thinking about the timing out.
Because
just thinking about everything that we do.
Brilliant speaker speaking at once. Who do I listen to?
But even that in itself is a meditation. So I'd be saying that while you're making the dinner, or while you're preparing something, whatever it is that you're doing, that's a really good time to put on, say, give yourself the mental break, put on your favorite song, put on some dance music, that kind of thing. I think the first thing is just to be kind to yourself for a little bit. That is the first step. I think let's walk away and just absorb what I've heard. That would be the first thing I'd be looking for.
I would posit that I'm busy is an excuse.
You always do that to me.
I know, to not challenge ourselves, but also an excuse to not actually intentionally own our own balance. We're responsible for balance in our lives. Our boss isn't. We tell people how we're going to be willing to jump through 87 hoops or not. So there's a couple of techniques that we use with some of our clients. Like, it's okay to say, thank you very much. I can let you know that I have 8 ththings on my plate right now. Which one would you like me to take off so that I can get that done by your deadline? But if I'm not going to drop anything else, I can get things done by Thursday. You know, this intentional willingness to honor your own balance is one of the first places a person can start, is to say, am I really busy, or am I using that as an excuse? Am I using it as the to say that I don't have control over my own life? Am I, you know, those kinds of pieces. So I think that's where we start. I think that's the very, very basis, is how do I define what balance looks like, and then how do I set the parameters for that intention?
I think part of that avoidance is very much a part of not wanting to be standing too close to the edge. It's I know I'm I'm not really one for heights, right? So it's like as I start to walk towards the edge, and it's like, hey, check out the view, and I say, yeah, I can see it really nicely just from here.
Yeah.
So I think that avoidance that we have is very much about meeting our fears. So
living
it's
in our comfort
what
zone.
are we exactly? And if that busyness being that avoidance factor, and being able to distract ourselves from what the focus needs to be, is a very critical thing. And so what about the techniques, those things that help us actually look in that direction so that we're not avoiding?
You know, years
Because as
ago,
we avoid, we put the blinker on and we shift away to do something else, right?
Right.
years ago, I worked with a fellow who literally was hauled to emergency because he had overworked himself and collapsed at the office. It was absolutely frightening, and it was maybe 7 years later. I asked him, "So what was going on for you back then?" And he said, "Well, I figured if I stopped long enough to rest, I'd have to get to know myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wasn't sure I'd like what I'd find." And I think there's a few people who, in this time, are learning to discover who they are, and it's a little scary. For them.
Wait, you're talking about somebody besides me, right?
No, but really, the decisions I've made that got me here, and where my
Right.
focus has been, I'm a little scared to acknowledge that's where I'm at. Now I have all this quiet time to think about that. And that edge, you were dead on, Simone, I think, with, yeah, that looks exciting, but I'm really comfortable here.
Yeah.
So I like the way you put that, except I think that here doesn't exist. In that kind of that proverbial sense, is I'm holding on to something that actually isn't there. And I don't just mean because we can have meetings via Zoom or collaborate. I think I was in a conversation recently. It's like, well, so all of my work is on Zoom meetings right now, or Teams meetings, and you hear kids in the background. And somebody will go, "Oh, sorry, my kid's on online school and talking to their teacher," and there's dogs, and there's part of it that feels very organic, but there's also I get my work phone buzzes at 11 o'clock at night, and the conversation is continuing. But just the idea that I show up at 8 o'clock and I leave at 5 o'clock is being challenged. What if I need to go away, as I've been doing, to bring food to my mother who's 85 years old, and I forbid her to leave her house, so I'm bringing her food. Kathy and I are bringing her food. And so I take time out of my day to do that. And I think that we're not going to go back to the, stay in your desk until noon and then you leave at 5, 0.00.00. I think the idea that there's new ways of working that work for me, that help me. And the challenge, I think, in a lot of ways, I read another article this morning that said something like the way organizations behave in the next 60 days are going to set the tone for them for the next 20 years. And partly they're talking about it from the shopping of talent, meaning talent is paying attention. And if companies don't try, take care of them or treat them well, on the other side of this current crisis, they're going to go shopping for a company that they feel more aligns with their values and allows them to be who they want to be. And that's going to become very difficult for Neanderthal organizations who can't attract talent and they're not sure why.
Well, it's interesting. When I was researching for a presentation not so long ago, but it's a quote I saw that I thought had a really good premise behind it. And the premise is very simple. You have to become a destination company. Now think about that just for a second. So rather than, and having come from HR myself and doing all the recruiting and everything else, it's one of those things where rather than, sometimes you got the wrong candidate because people would oversell the company and say,
right,
you know, here's all the benefits and, you know, you really want to work here, rather than really looking to see if there was a good fit between what that person wants to do with their life and how they want to be versus how that fits in with the company, you know, the values and everything else. But being a destination company is one of those things where it says, you know, that company, that's the sort of place I want to work in. That's where I need to be.
I came face to face with that not that long ago. You know, I've mentioned in other places that you know, as a CIO, I frequently get people to reach out and say, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about, you know, opportunities at your organization." And this one young gal was an MBA candidate at a university that's literally, you know, half a mile from my office. And I said, well, sure, why don't you come on over and we'll talk. And so she comes in, we meet, and I say, well, let me talk to you a little bit about, you know, what opportunities. And she paused me and said, no, I actually, I really want to know about you as a leader. You know, what are your values? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals and objectives? And really wanted to know about the organization, because to her, it was more important that she found an organization that aligned with her values than that she found an opportunity to use her skills. And go ahead, Roy.
No, I think when you did mention that particular episode before, I asked the question, what's that going to be like after this? Because the situation is going to be dramatically changed.
I think
we don't know what. We're standing on the edge. We don't know what the other side looks like. We don't know what. But the situation, the work situation will have dramatically changed. Companies are going to drop like flies during this entire thing.
I think so too.
So there's going to, that fact that we had full employment is going to be very different after this. And I think, and maybe I'm being a little bit cynical here, but I think that people who think that they can pick and choose are not going to be able to do that so much after this is over. They may, because circumstances demand it, just have to say, well, you know what, I got to take this job at McDonald's because I can't get the job I want. And that's not a destination company for me, at least in the sense of, you know, handing the burgers out the window with my gloved hand.
Right.
Life is going to be different.
What I've been hearing, I agree with you, and that's that growth period. I mean, we're going to see, we can't deny the economic impacts that are happening right now. We absolutely can't deny that. And they're happening all over. And there are people who are leaders who are making really, really tough decisions. And how you treat your people, no matter how empathetic or compassionate you want to be, sometimes you're just forced into the situation you're forced into as a leader. I also think, though, that we've been talking for years about the power of the continuous improvement model within organizations as a whole business, not just a DevOps initiative over in a corner over here, but we're talking about continuous improvement, how we fund it, how we are organizationally structured, what that looks like. We talked in one other episode about how performance does not equal attendance. That really, really, we need to start looking at what are people delivering, what are the value we're asking for, and being flexible and agile enough to understand that they can do that at 2 a.m. if they happen to be somebody who has to be an at-home caregiver.
I recently, sorry, go on.
So I think that what, you know, I just love that expression, Simone, by the way, destination company, because I think the potential is there right now to take a look at ourselves as in our organizations and say, are we? And if we aren't, why not?
There was something I came across that I found was really interesting, and I think it has an idea of some of the new things that are happening as a result of this. It's called the global hack. And I was really curious about this. We always have those wonderful things with using Slack to collaborate and stuff like that. And this one is talking about fighting a global crisis. And with 3 billion people in lockdown, they want to hack the future, if you like. But the interesting thing about this, it is a real hackathon, and these people are bringing their ideas, and I'm talking hundreds of people have been joining this thing with their various skill sets. Some people have come with an idea of what they have and they want to build a team from it. Other people are looking for a team and saying, here are my skill sets, I'm looking for a team. And they've actually got all their Slack channels sorted out amongst this sort of stuff and into the areas like public health or into other things about looking for the mentors and stuff. So there's a whole host of this. So I'd recommend just having a look at that from an ideas perspective about how people are bringing their technology skill sets together as well as their business commercial skill sets. So some people have said, look, I'm really good at this, but I'm lousy at doing communication and marketing stuff. Who's got that? And so what's happening, just like we've talked about in having self-organizing teams in business, even in our normal workplace or in our, other frameworks like DevOps and agile teams and stuff, this is exactly what's now happening, but it's happening on a global level. So there is no actual company that's employing these people. They're employing each other.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's an incredible thing to see.
So,
and doing something with purpose. They have specific ideas in how they are going to help manage through the crisis and what then they can do to take that on afterwards.
Yeah, it's not just that I'm looking for a position that has a company has the values that I want and I get to do something. It literally is, do I believe in the vision? In what we're doing. And I had talked about emergent teaming in a previous episode about these teams form out of nowhere. And time, space, distance, culture, international boundaries don't exist in this new world. And so we can literally spin up like you can have a product ready by the time the sun goes down where one of you are, hopefully the one that's the furthest west. And so things are possible. Now we have to start thinking about what is it that we want to do? What might we want to do?
I think this is amazing, just because just the sort of way that some people are bringing themselves together around economic issues, or around education, or around environment, or governance, or future of work, mental health. These are all. There are so many different possibilities. What's the art of the possible? There is so many different areas that contain possibilities, and I think that's where creating these channels or creating these spaces for these people to go and, in a way, shop their future.
Yeah.
And that sounds a really strange term, but in a way, that's kind of what's happening.
This is that book.
Yeah, I thought I'd bring up the book that Greg referenced earlier, and we are just about 10 minutes away from the end of today's episode. And this is a fascinating discussion that we're in now, because I think that for years, a lot of us have been saying, with reference to our specific space, which is, let's say IT in the broadest sense, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I say it in reference a lot to metrics. We can measure it. Does that mean we should measure it? No, we want to focus on things that we need to measure and the things that will help us as we go on. So now we're in this space where we could pretty much do anything, right? As Greg said, there are no boundaries. There are no not possibility. Everything's a possibility. We're at the North Pole. Every step is south. So how do we frame the questions we need to ask ourselves? How do we frame some of those questions? How do we say to ourselves, of course we're frightened because we're afraid we're going to get it wrong when we first try it, right?
I think it's in challenging. It's if we're going to think differently about our goals, we have to ask ourselves why with everything. I think that, questioning the comfort zone and the path that we were on, instead of, shifting the loss toward the challenge. And I think let's challenge everything. Let's ask ourselves, hey, hold on a minute. Is that really true? I mean, the barriers to opportunity are now being challenged,
Yeah.
right?
And barriers that you think exist may no longer
Longer exist.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think there's another question too, is how do I want to feel? Because quite often that drives us to a particular space as well. What are those things that make you feel that you're accomplishing something? What were those moments? And, you were saying again, Greg, earlier that, and also Patty, about muting the noise, having that opportunity to sit there and think about, when did I feel good? What was I doing when I felt good? What were those, was it the environment? Was it the people? Was it the activity itself? So asking those kind of straight up questions about how was I feeling? What do I want to feel? And doing more of that,
So that book that I mentioned by Clay Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life, has an exercise in it that I think is really valuable. Put yourself 5 years in the future and imagine a reporter is writing about your life. Imagine that a reporter is writing about your life. Who do you want to be? What were your critical values? What was your how did you empower people? What did you do? How did you fit into your community? If you could sit down and write, who do I want to be, as the reporter writing about your life 5 years from now, what does that article look like?
And we're all writing our own novels.
Yeah,
that's very true. That's
right?
very true.
I'm the star in my own movie.
Well,
Yeah.
I was actually just going to ask you that very question. So if somebody was to play you in a movie, who would you choose it to be?
Me.
No. Here's what I want to know. Simone, if I were starring in a movie, who would you cast as me?
Oh, be careful, Greg.
Oh,
I
there's
know.
Door
so
wide
many
open.
possibilities. Oh my goodness. We might save that conversation for after.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So here's one of the things that I did. This is me, and none of you, I don't think any of you know this. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is, if you plan and think and spend months and months planning what it is that you're going to try to do, you're heavily invested in that, emotionally or otherwise. And I think you're raising the stakes of, if this fails, this is going to really, really hurt. And so I watched on my LinkedIn feed, and a big name, I'm not going to mention who, put out the call of, hey, I'm looking for guests for my podcast. And so I go and look at the podcast, and it's like, technology and data governance and all that kind of stuff. It's like, cool. So I send a pitch right there on the spot. I said, this is what I do. This is what I've done. These are the things that I'm interested in. Yada, da, da, da. Silence. No response whatsoever. I've been shunned. And it was okay, because I counted it a success, because it's not important that I got selected and got engaged. I'm successful. It was important that I took that step and said, I'm going to take a step. And this is me trying to experiment. Like, what have I got to lose? And I wasn't invested in it. I didn't make spend months in investing in a strategy to get myself onto the, big podcasts or whatever. And so I celebrated that. That was a success for me, because I took a small step where the stakes were low, and I entered with the right attitude, which was, I got nothing to lose here, right? I think that's a very important step, is don't make the next so big. In fact, I would encourage folks not to write the novel, because everybody's writing a novel. I've got one right here, and it's going to be a bestseller. I know it, because my characters are so well developed. I encourage you to write an article. I encourage you to write a journal. I encourage you to just write something and get, what was the thing that you said, Roy? Right, when you don't know what to write one thing that you know is true. One sentence.
It's Hemingway. It's
Hemingway.
Write one true sentence.
And I would suggest, if I could put a fine point on all of this conversation, is if you can determine what a true sentence is for you. That would be the victory, not that you started writing, but that you figured out what you understood to be true. And I think that's kind of where we're at, is if you take the time, if you mute the noise, if you experiment with low cost, low risk experiments, you may find out what that one true thing is. And that's going to open the possibilities to moving forward. And with that, I'm muting because I love it. I'm excited. I'm going to go out and do this thing.
I'm just going to say that if my lips are
you
moving
ready?
and there's nothing else happening, it's because these guys keep muting the noise. That's all I'm going to say. So final thoughts. We're coming down to the wire here a little bit.
You got mine. You got my final thoughts. I yield the time to the senator from Mississauga, or wherever she lives.
Mississauga.
It's the only Canadian city that I could think of. Sorry,
Canadian
Patty.
geography, not Greg's strong suit. Okay.
Was it ever?
Alberta.
Alberta, that's...
I'm not far from you, Greg. I'm much closer than Mississauga. Final thoughts. I agree. You find your truth by challenging what you thought was true. I really think you challenge yourself in seeing yourself in possibility.
Do you
I
think
think that you don't have to actually stand on that edge alone either.
Yeah.
You can actually already have, you can have someone there holding your hand. You can have people that are either at your back and willing to push you off, because sometimes you need that.
as long as you've got the as long as
As long as you've got the parachute. Yeah, exactly. Or the bungee cord, doesn't matter.
No,
as long as you get...
I want the little outfit that has the wings on it where you go flying. That's what I want to do.
Squirrel suit.
Squirrel
suit. The squirrel suit. That's it. Yeah. I think that's a really critical thing, is that you can find your courage sometimes just by a nod or a wink from a friend or a support network as well.
Yeah.
So that brings us pretty much right up to the end of our broadcast, and we are broadcasting now. This is really a broadcast. We're live on YouTube, and it's such a privilege for me to be connected with you all. And the technology that allows us to do this as often as we do it, which is pretty much anytime we want to, and to do this once a week, just kind of displaying what we're going through individually, what we're thinking about, the kinds of questions we're asking to ourselves and to the world at large. We're all puzzling through this, and we're here.
The journey is a bunch of adventures strung together.
There you go. That's a wonderful thing. I like that. And maybe that's our next episode title. We'll talk during the week and figure that out. For anybody that wants to tweet us or comment, I put the hashtag is KTLO Learn. And we'll be back, probably streaming live on YouTube again. And we're happy to do that. And we'll see you when we're back. Thank you so much.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Happy Passover, however you're celebrating. Okay.